Cool. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Hello to the cat on the screen with Carolina. Welcome to I think this is the 7th session of the ILM training program with Ricolto EcoAg. Today, we're going to be talking about integrated landscape finance. It's an introductory session. We have here with us Seth Seamus from the EcoAg team. He's our finance expert, and I think it's going to be a really interesting session. We're going to be pivoting in a slightly different direction. I already posted the link to the quiz in the chat box. I'm going to post it here again so you guys can get started on the quiz while we're doing the introductions. Seth, could you jump ahead to slide 3, please? Thanks, Seth. So just to give you guys a brief recap of where we are in the program, we've gone through the introduction to ILM and to the ILM framework. We've looked at the 5 different elements on the ILM wheel. We've talked about the importance of integrating different stakeholders and being very inclusive in the stakeholder mapping and identification process, making sure we bring in all stakeholders into the process. We've talked about how to identify and how to engage those stakeholders. Then we started talking about landscape partnerships and how we can think about different ways that we can organize and govern our landscape and how we can organize and structure and govern our landscape partnership. And then we started talking a little bit about shared vision. So this is what we did last week. Now that we've brought all the stakeholders together, how can we bring them all together into a shared vision and understand a common purpose for a way forward in the landscape? So now that we have more or less a shared vision, think hypothetically in the process with me, now that we all have a common purpose and an overall goal, and we share the same values and we know where we're going, now we start to think about how we're going to fund that process and that program of work. So we need to start thinking about finance. What does integrated landscape finance mean? So that's where Seth comes in today. And you can jump ahead to the next slide, please, Seth. So just a recap on our rules and roles for a welcoming learning space. Please try to keep your cameras on as much as possible. Feel free to interact, raise your hand, use the chat function, send us messages, ask questions. Really, please feel free to interact as much as possible. This is really a space and a time for the Ricolto team, and we want to make sure that you guys have a good opportunity to share experiences. And a reminder, Seth, since it's your first time here, we have people from all over the world here, and I always need to remind myself that we try to speak slowly because people have different first languages. So everybody try to speak slowly so that everyone can understand and enjoy the session. So I'm going to hand it over to Seth.
Thank you, Patricia. So as Patricia said, my name is Seth Seamus, and I'm the Managing Director at Eco Agriculture Partners, and I lead our work on finance and policy. And I also work within the 1,000 Landscapes Initiative, which I assume, Patricia, this has come up in this group. We have a team on finance solutions, we call it, finance solutions design team. So I work with that as well. And it's really a pleasure to be with you all today and to meet you. I know that this is the 7th session that you've had, so you all are probably all very, good friends at this point. You all know Patricia. So hopefully by the end of the session, I will be part of your group too, and we'll all be friends as well. I'm hoping, as Patricia said, for this to be very, interactive. The topic of this session is really about concepts. So we use this term integrated landscape finance, which is related, of course, to integrated landscape management. And I think that hopefully once we talk through the elements of what that is and what that means here, I'm going to move. Oh, this is our slide. Then it'll be easier for us all to talk about action, the tools that have been developed, and specific actionable approaches to doing integrated landscape finance. And we'll be talking about a little bit more of that in the next session, which will be on Thursday. But what I'm hoping to do in this session is to have a conversation with all of you about these ideas, so we're all, you know, on the same page. So the objectives of the session are understanding these key elements of integrated landscape finance. We're going to go through word by word here, integrated landscape finance, and talk through what this means. This was a suggestion actually by Patricia and Max before, who I know have done this with integrated landscape management, and we thought it might be a useful way to approach this as well. I should say, as an aside, I know that there are people who are a bit intimidated by some of the language around finance. They might not know what a particular word means, and they may not want to ask because they think they're supposed to know or something like this. I will let you in on a little bit of a secret that I've learned in the course of the last number of years of working on these, which is that some of these words are actually made to be complicated on purpose. Some of the people who work in the finance industry, it's like they have a goal of they don't want everyone to understand what they're doing all the time. So I'm hoping to kind of translate some of this for you. I think that at least my experience is these don't have to be very complicated concepts. It just sometimes the words themselves can seem complicated. So we're going to work through some of that, and then we're going to talk about our frameworks, what we mean by integrated landscape finance, how that and how that also relates to the action framework that you've been introduced to in the course of these other sessions, the integrated landscape management action framework. It's all very related, and so this will hopefully that discussion will help us all wrap our heads around what we mean here. So this is the agenda based on the objectives. Like I said, we'll work on key concepts, and we'll have a lot of discussion in between, and we'll have a case study. We'll talk about the integrated landscape finance framework, and then the challenges for integrated landscape finance, which will be a bridge to our next session about some of the solutions that eco-agriculture partners and 1,000 Landscapes and other people all around the world have come up with to try to meet the particular challenges of doing integrated landscape finance. So let's get started. So as a way to start, I know that you all come from very different backgrounds, and I actually don't know what everyone's background is. I know that geographically it's, you know, you all are from different places. I imagine you all have different professional backgrounds and different academic backgrounds. But I wanted to start this conversation just by asking simply, when you think of the word finance, what comes to mind? What words or phrases come to mind when you think about finance?
Maybe numbers, money.
Numbers and money. Yeah.
Maybe budget.
Budget. That's right. Yeah. And there are no wrong answers here, I should say, because I actually just looked, when preparing for this presentation, I just went on the internet and tried to look for finance. It actually means a lot of different things. So there's no right answer here. Someone else?
I think maybe the financial resources that are needed to make this concept as an integrated landscape management, where different people come together, like the platform, are needed, and at the same time, not just financial resources in terms of cash or liquidity, but also the different assets that can be used as leverage.
This is really good. And Katrine says planning. So budget, money, numbers, planning, power. Really good one as well.
Seth, can I make a comment?
Please.
I think it's really interesting that, you know, most of the words are related to actual money and numbers, but oh, look at this complicated system. This is a good one. Complicated system. I was actually going to talk about power, but this is a really interesting one as well. People associate people with money with people who have power, people who are making the decisions. And I think that's a really interesting idea to unpack.
You know, it really is too, and it's actually it's very related to how we internally talk about integrated landscape finance. Just this is a bit of an aside, but I think there are the elements of of finance which are the day-to-day you know, it's how to get money from one place to another place. Like what is the engineering around how to do that? You know, there are a lot of very smart people who think about this. It's like their whole entire job is basically to be engineers, to think about how to get money from one place to another place, which is one part of finance, you know, getting into the definition. But it's true, there are all these, then there's finance as a system, right? There's all this together. There's social elements, there's the power elements, who has the money, where does the money go, and who makes the decisions about that. And the truth is, in our case, and what we're talking about, all these things kind of wrap up together. We're not going to talk too much about the finance system as a whole in this session. We'll talk more about, I think, the specifics of like how to get money to your landscape. But I think these are really important observations, that when you do take a step back from figuring out how to get money to your landscape, you do inevitably run into these other issues about power and, you know, enabling environment and policy, all these kinds of issues. You know, it's the question of how money gets from one place to another place does not exist in a vacuum, you know. So there will be situations where you may be working on something, and you're like, how do I get money from this place to this place? How do I get money to my project, to my landscape? And the answer isn't that, oh, well, you're not smart enough to figure it out or something. It just might be something about the system which makes it difficult for you to do that. So I think it's important to keep all this in mind. Yes, Raul. You're on mute.
Sorry. When we have a landscape and we're trying to create this platform and work with all the stakeholders, I would assume that most of all the people who are partnered in this process, even though some have more power, some more political power, some others have more financial resources, in theory, it should work like a cooperative or association where everyone has the same power, in theory, even though some of them have more financial resources. So I would assume that everyone has the same voice and making their voice heard to achieve the final goal. Or someone who has more financial resources can play with the different strings and go with some on a different direction?
Well, this is a, I'm sorry. I mean, this is a very big question, and this gets into other elements of landscape partnership and landscape management that are not just specifically about finance. I mean, it could be that Patricia or Bamey even have something to say about this. I think one of the goals of integrated landscape management generally is to bring together stakeholders in a landscape who inevitably will have different levels of power. I mean, there's no place in the world that I know of that every stakeholder comes to the table with the same resources, the same background, the same information. In sort of an ideal version of integrated landscape management, there is a facilitated process which helps at least to surface a lot of those issues. I think we can't say that there's some magic wand you can wave and say just by people getting together, all of the power issues will be worked out. But I guess there are strategies that can be used to help with communication and conflict management around that. And all that is very related to the issues of who has the money, who has the power. So I don't know if that actually answers your question, but yeah, Bamie, do you want to say something about that?
No, I was just, I mean, it's great what you said. I would only just add or underscore, which is, I know a lot when you do community engagement and social change work, one key thing is just acknowledging the power dynamic and the element of power versus sanitizing or pretending it doesn't exist. So acknowledging that elephant in the room is huge. And then thinking about that in terms of its implications and how you facilitate, how you try to be inclusive, how you try to build trust over time, and the relationship between power and sort of the history of a place. So I think acknowledging it and thinking about that in your facilitation can I mean, there's no magic wand and it never will take away the complex messiness of it, but it can go a long way in building trust and sort of democratizing the process more.
And this is now skipping ahead a little bit, but this is good. We're having the discussion, but I'll say one more thing about this that we can, talk again about later in the session. One of the benefits of what we would call integrated landscape finance or integrated landscape management, as far as this imbalance of power goes, is that the ideal would be that the people with who have this more power or have more resources or who would be funding those with less resources would recognize the benefit of having a collective vision and a collective set of actions that everyone had bought into. And that there was this collective set of actions that if you did them together would lead towards some positive transformation in the landscape. And let's call them the people with power to be very simplistic about it. They recognize that they cannot do what they need to do by themselves. So they recognize that they are reliant on the other people in the landscape to make this transformation of, let's say, the watershed, or the biodiversity in the landscape, or the economic transformation. That just because they have more money than the other people, they all have a common destiny, and they can't be. They're all linked together, whether they like it or not. This is sort of the core idea behind the integrated landscape management. So you could have all the money in the world in your landscape, but then there's no water left in your landscape because you can't do it by yourself, because you can't drink the money, you can't eat the money. So anyway, this is good. So finance is a very, very rich topic. Okay, so we'll move on. Finance. So we talked about what is finance. So I'll tell you, and Patricia, can you see me?
You need to share your screen again.
Okay, so I'm just looking at my screen and no one else is looking at my screen.
Let me know if you ever want me to share mine.
Okay. Get back on the slide. Okay, so I as I mentioned, I looked up different definitions of finance. I put a very simple one for the purpose of this presentation, which is matters related to accessing and managing money. Okay, just whoever the first person was, I'm sorry, I don't remember who was, who said, what do you think about when you think about finance? You said, money. I think that's pretty much right on the nose for what we'll talk about today. As I said before, how do you get funding for the activities for which you want to have funded? That's what I'm thinking about today when I'm talking about finance. And there are different flavors of finance, or you can think of different flavors of money, okay, for funding your activities. Some of these, there's money that comes for activities that are for a profit. They're for a commercial benefit, okay? And you won't be tested on all of these, but the point is, or maybe you will be, I don't know, Patricia, maybe you have a quiz after this. That this comes in different forms, as you all know. I mean, there's an enormous industry of people who are professionals in coming up with all kinds of creative ways of getting money to people and getting money back. And sometimes it crashes the whole global economy. People get so creative. Happened in 2009, but we won't get into that right now. So sometimes you're lent money. So this is called debt. So this is, imagine you're all familiar with this. You get money from a bank and you have to pay the bank back. And you pay it back with interest. Sometimes we can call them a loan. A loan is a kind of debt, a debt mechanism. Sometimes you have to pay the money back immediately, after 6 months. Sometimes you pay it back after 5 years. There are people who buy houses and they have very long loans where they pay the money back over 30 years. So there are lots of different ways to get debt. It depends what you're doing, what the activity is, what the cash flow is, how quickly you make money from what you're doing, and how quickly you can pay back the bank or whoever it is who's giving you the money. So that's one type of finance. Other type of for-profit mechanism is, it's called equity. Equity is when you're one entity buys a stake in another entity. So this would be, a company starts and a company needs more money to get going. But rather than giving the company money to pay back, you actually give them money and then you own part of the company. And that ownership or that equity stake is what gives value to we'll call it the investor. Okay, it's just a different way of a different type of arrangement, a contract between those two entities. Buying stocks in the stock market is a version of this, like on a very small scale. There are firms you may have heard called private equity firms or public equity firms, which exist they find different kinds of companies, and there are a number of these that exist for sustainable land management activities, like sustainable agriculture activities. There are these companies that exist, the private equity firms that will give money to a company and then they just own a certain percentage of the company. And there are other mechanisms that have to do with insurance and risk guarantees, which we won't get into all the details, right now, but oh, excuse me, these mechanisms help, let's say they help kind of facilitate other investors to invest in something, meaning there's a really important concept of risk when it comes to an investor. And when I say investor, I mean a person or an entity that decides to give money to another person or entity. And sometimes the risk is too high to make the decision to give them money. So there are these other financial instruments like insurance, which says, okay, well, if something happens, there's to the currency of this country, or there's like a political risk of this country, or there's weather, there's like there's a drought, this kind of thing. You can buy insurance for that, which would reduce your risk and help ease the flow of money between these entities. All right, so that's sort of for profit. And then for nonprofit mechanisms, these are I think pretty straightforward. One is just grants, which I imagine you're all very familiar with in your work. We certainly are familiar with this at Eco Agriculture Partners. Working in the nonprofit space, we deal with this a lot. Grants can come from government. They can come from foundations, from philanthropies. And a grant is different than this for-profit mechanism because the grant, typically, you don't have to pay money back for a grant. So when someone gives a grant, they are looking for a return in some way, but that return is usually not a financial return. They may want a return of some social benefit or an environmental benefit of some kind, but the person giving the grant is not trying to get money back like they are in the sort of debt and equity instruments. And then there are the public finance instruments, the subsidies, direct investment by government that might be in between these things, actually. And again, I don't want to get too much in the details, but there are classes of these mechanisms that are a combination between the two, often referred to as blended finance or concessional finance. These are two words you might hear, where there is an expectation of a financial return, but it's not as much as you might otherwise have. So for example, like a development bank might give a loan, but instead of asking for a 10% interest rate, they would get like a 1% interest rate or something. So in a way, it's kind of like it's a grant in a way, but there is still some sense of a financial return. So that was pretty heavy stuff. Let's see what we have next. So we can take a breath from this and just get a little more conversation. So thinking through this, so this is also helps me because we're meeting for the first time. So what are some of the activities in your landscape that you're thinking about right now that require financing? Yeah, Raul?
I'm sorry, since nobody's raising their hand, so I cannot jump in. I would think that when you are starting, if you are not from the area and you're trying to set up a integrated landscape management with all the stakeholders, one of the first things that you will have to invest is in mapping all the actors in the area. Probably there is not a lot of financial resources, but it implies some resources in probably visiting the place and getting to know the people around and from then trying to filter which ones are the ones who are more important. And like we talked about before, have that matrix where we have the power and the interest and see which one of those will be more important to access first. But we will have some spending on that as well once we start getting people together. We will have to have probably one-on-one meetings to explain what the methodology is about. But then once we start getting all people together, that's another type of that generates some resources that we have to spend. And I guess from that, that's where the tricky part, and see what or what partner or what stakeholder can bring to the table, and see what the resources they have and how they're gonna contribute to the platform, and from then to make a general budget for the whole integrated landscape management.
So Raul, you're looking for potential funders in the process of doing the stakeholder mapping?
In some way, not funders, but at least that when I talk about who has more money or resource, financial resources, is because usually when you have more money, you have more power in the area. And some people, stakeholders are followers, and others are leaders in some processes. So that's why we need to identify that as well. But in terms of spending resources, to begin with a project like this, we wouldn't have to have some people who will probably finance some of the first activities in the area.
You think so?
I think what Rose is alluding to, something that we often talk about, Seth, about how you need money for the projects themselves, but you also need money for the convening and the coordinating of all the different people in this, you know, who's paying the facilitator to bring all of these people together, and who's paying for the coordination and the convening activities.
Yeah. Well, I have a slide about this later, but I'll sort of introduce it now. I mean, we actually have, Raul, we have words for this that help us keep it straight. We talk about enabling investment and asset investment. With enabling investment, which are largely correlated with sort of commercial profit, finance, and then not commercial finance. So the investments that have to do with the stakeholder partnership itself, like the landscape partnership, we consider that an enabling investment. Or work trying to develop new kinds of policy enabling investment. And then there's sort of the on the ground, transition from sun coffee to shade coffee, or something like a specific activity. We would call that asset investment. Now we can talk more about that in a bit, but yeah, it gets a little bit confusing too, because it's not clear all the time who should be funding which activity. We've seen situations before where people might be looking for like public money for something that actually should be more of a private investor, and they look for a private investor for something that actually should be like a public good, and it's difficult to figure all of that out. All right, well, so let's go on in our journey towards constructing the term integrated landscape finance. So we talked about finance. And so now we'll talk about integrated. Okay, so if we know what finance is, what do we mean when we say integrated finance? So this is a slide I think that you've seen before in the discussion of integrated landscape management. So I'm just reintroducing it here as a refresher in this context of finance. So this is an important idea. This perhaps even the core idea, other than landscape, of what we work on at Eco Agriculture Partners and 1,000 Landscapes. It's the idea of bringing together people who have in their heads there are different priorities, different sectors, if you will, and that they have their own agendas, but those agendas are related to each other. The outcomes are related to each other. So it's impossible for them to achieve their outcomes on their own. So they come together, so isolated, divided, separated. So, you know, the opposite of that, if you will, the integrated, is where they're connected to each other, where they're talking to each other. They recognize their common destinies. And based on that, they develop a joint vision and a joint set of activities that allow them to meet their goals. So we'll go on here. As far as an actual definition, integrated finance. So this is one that I just made up because it's not actually a term we use a lot, like in general conversation. What is integrated finance? So this is a process of accessing funds to achieve a specific set of coordinated goals and objectives by a group of stakeholders. And this can happen in a variety of contexts. So, you know, we're going to talk, the next term we're going to talk about is landscape, but this actually doesn't have to happen in a landscape context. You could have an integrated finance approach, you know, just within a supply chain, for example, or an integrated finance approach working in like the healthcare industry in your country, for example, set of activities. It doesn't have to be place-based. I can move on if we don't have experiences of this, but can any of you have an experience of working on integrated finance, even outside of a landscape context? Like an effort to develop a financial plan or financial strategy for a set of actions?
Seth, could we maybe think about this, try to think outside the box and just think of an example as in, for example, could integrated finance be a group of friends coming together, pooling their funds to buy something that they need? Would you consider that to be integrated finance?
Yeah, it could be. It could be.
Is it
Yeah.
essentially the idea of, sorry, go ahead, someone was gonna.
Okay, no, I was wondering if the same route that maybe I didn't explain myself at the beginning is like, we have all these different actors, stakeholders, and we need to know who has money. So when we wanna do all these activities, we do these activities not as a Raul, as a Seth, as a Mafi, but we do it as a group, as a platform. So in that sense, I was thinking like Patricia was saying, who has the money and who's putting how much, and it's like a little piggyback. And from there we start doing all these activities. So when I think integrated is because we are all putting money, maybe some more, some less, but that become like like the little money that we have to do all the different kind of activities. I'm not sure the integrate finance goes that way as well, or maybe I'm just lost.
No, it isn't. This makes me think, you know, of another slide we could create, because this would actually be, it would be good to have a good a visual. The truth is, I guess when I think of integrated finance, you could have, you know, two sides of the equation, and maybe Raul, what you're talking about, and Patricia, what you're talking about is one side of the equation, is figuring a way to pool together different kinds of resources to invest into something. And that's one part of it being integrated. in my mind, there's the other side, which is also integrated. So you're not just pooling your funds to invest in one thing. There would be different actors investing their funds, but what you're investing in is a set of activities, not just a single activity that are related to each other. So there's integration that happens on the side of the investment, if you will, how you pull together and how you stitch together the different kinds of money. So, I mentioned the debt mechanisms and the equity and the grants and all that kind of stuff. But then it has to get to the integrated landscape management idea, like the action plan of the integrated landscape management idea. It's a set of activities that have been identified, by some group of stakeholders that if you do them together have this emergent kind of set of properties. So that's what I think about when I think about integrated finance. And again, we think about it in the landscape context, but it doesn't have to be.
Seth, maybe I'm thinking more in a simplistic way, that thinking that usually all stakeholders. I understand and I remember the slide that you presented us for profit and non-profit organizations at the beginning of the session. And maybe I think it more like in a simplistic way, like I said, because most of the stakeholders we have, they don't have those kind of resources. They don't have money on the they just have limited resources. So whatever they have, they put all together, and that's when we have all these execute all these joint activities to improve the landscape.
And so, Ru, that's really interesting. So what would be, like, when you say they execute the joint activities, so what are the activities they fund together with this collective set of resources?
Oh, I would think that if we wanna to work in an integrated landscape management, one we you map all the stakeholders and you have them together and you meet. Probably the first couple meetings. After a few meetings, you will have to have a plan, operational plan for the whole landscape as a team, as a group. And all the action will have to be approved as a group. So whatever things you're doing is to improve all these geographical area that you have defined as a landscape. So if there would be training or capacity building in general, or you're gonna do some intervention on the field, or whatever you're gonna do, that's within the operative annual plan that you have developed together as a group. As I said, maybe I'm kind of lost. That's what I was thinking as because when we think about finance and I understand like the resources can come from different ways, but when I think about integrated, I think that resources are gonna come from different points, and that's gonna become a one thing that the group could use to do or execute all these activities that have been written in this annual plan for the group. But as I said, I might be confused.
No. So in this is a very, very interesting case you're describing. So this plan that they come up with together, is this specifically a plan of activities for this collective money that they've come up with together? You said that people pool their money and then there's a sort of an action plan. Is the action plan for the money, that specific?
Well, it's not just for the money, because there might be in the plan action that won't require too much financing, but in general, all the activities that are planned for the year, they will they pursue a goal that benefit the whole landscape. So when you say integrated finance, that's why I'm thinking, well, we want to do actions together, but the money has to come from everyone. And some can give more, some other less, depending on the financial strength of each organization, institution, or stakeholder in the area. So, for example, this is not an integrated landscape management, but I work in right to food, from fostering a human rights-based approach. So we have a little platform that we have different actors. Some of them have more money, others they don't have expertise. And we come together, we have to come together with an annual plan, and then we have to execute all these actions with the money that we have from different sources. So I was wondering if the landscape kind of work like that when we say integrated finance. Or just because it comes from different sources, not just talking about like if you have money in the stock exchange, or you have money in bonds, or you have money that come from grants, and you are integrating all these financial resources from different sources. So I'm not sure if there's two different ways that I look at that.
Is, in what you're describing with these resources, are these sort of, grant resources, if you will? Is it funding, or are there people who are giving money and trying to get some sort of financial return from their investment?
Well, some organizations, they have money to do some different kind of activities, so probably won't have like a common saving account, for example, but they pay for some activities, and that get written in the annual operating plan. So that way, if we have 15 activities, we know where the money is gonna come from to pay all those kind of activities, but those activities is gonna be the way to pursuing different goals within the landscape. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not sure, because for example, if we are in a place that we want to improve the local policies, one of the stakeholders in the area probably have more resources to have a workshop, but will benefit everyone in the area. Or if we have some training that could improve the technology in how to produce a specific crop, other stakeholder can cannot pay for those kind of activities. So everyone is pulling strings and moving some money to accomplish all the different activities. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining
No,
this.
no, this is great. No, again, we could talk about this further on, but since we're talking about it now, there are some models that have emerged, fairly recently that I think, essentially what you're describing, a couple. One is the idea of a sort of a landscape-based grant facility. So if it's just sort of about funding projects that have been identified as a priority within a landscape, the idea of having like a central place where all this money comes together, whether it's coming internally from the people, stakeholders themselves in the landscape, or whether there's some other kind of external money coming in from a national actor, international actor. But there's basically an action plan, as you described, Raul, that has been identified and governed in some way by the people in the landscape.
Yeah.
Who are making the decisions about where the money goes. And that you would just have, but you would have a central entity, like even like a legal entity. This is a problem in a lot of places also, is that there aren't places that have the ability to absorb this kind of money because they don't have that certain kind of expertise to manage that money. They don't have the right, the right documents and the right track record and all that kind of stuff. So that's a model that's been emerging, sort of maybe like kind of a professionalized fund, if you will, for grants. But you can have the same thing for commercial investment, or a combination of commercial and grant investment. It could still be like a landscape-based fund, excuse me, that's managed locally and that has, the maybe the governing group of a stakeholder partnership, if you have such a thing, that's making the investment decisions, you know, to make sure that it has legitimacy and that it tracks with the priorities of the stakeholders in that place. But it can actually be like a commercial sort of thing. Like people could still put money in and say, you know, I just want to get my money back from this, but rather than just, you know, put my money in a bank account or buy stocks of some international company, I'd rather invest my money in the local agenda of the people who work here, you know? So that's a model too that's emerging in not just in the landscape context, but in other kind of integrated contexts. Yes, Penny?
Yeah, I have sharing with our currently project on cocoa in Indonesia with integrated finance model or approach. In our case, we have developed project with the landscape approach. We have NGO, we have farmer cooperative, financial institution, and also private sector as a buyer. And we create the action plan in the beginning, in the first, before running the program. And after that, we setting up the budget plan. And every stakeholder, they put money in the basket for how each role each other, and the buyer not only as sell and buying only, but also active involved in this project. And also the government. Government, the role is put money, not only active in process, but also put money in the basket. And after that, our donor, they involve half money for supporting activity for this process. This is our currently project with cocoa for we call transforming cocoa, and we have objective to produce 100 ton a year for the fermented bean, and the bean should be supplied to Valrhona, and Valrhona put money in the project, and government, they also put money in the project as not only rule enabling environment, not only enabling environment, but also they give they put money for develop some infrastructure. That's our case. And my question: this is part of integrated financial or still a conventional approach?
Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like it's integrated in the sense that there are a variety of different stakeholders who are pooling their funds together for a common agenda. And that common agenda includes a group of different activities. So it's sort of integrated on both sides, it seems. Can I ask you in your case?
Yes.
You mentioned the people putting money into the basket. I'm
Yes.
actually just I'm curious about the mechanics of that. I mean, what is the basket? Who manages that basket of money?
The basket is managed by consortium.
Okay.
As the member of consortium is NGO is self, like Agriculto, also Rainforest Alliance, and also the local NGO and government, and Valrhona as a buyer. And they control, they have a regularly meeting to control and to give feedback related with impact on something regarding with the objective or something, and after that they will running or make a new action plan to after getting feedback from the consortium, for the steering committee from the consortium. We have the control of the budget by steering committee. As steering committee, the member of steering committee is NGO like Agriculture and Forest Alliance, local NGO inside, and also the government and Valrhona itself.
This is great. I mean, that
And
sounds,
yeah,
that sounds-
and every time we have a quarterly, we sit together to review on the process, review on the targeted, something like that.
and I'd say, I mean, this sounds like a very sophisticated governance model that you have, decision making about where the money goes.
Yeah,
I think is really, really important, because I mean, again, I think you all know this, but we get going back to the issue of the power dynamics,
okay.
and who has the
Okay.
money and who has the control of the money, and all of that is just very loaded and can create all kinds of conflicts within a stakeholder group. So if you
Yeah.
manage to develop that governance that people are happy with, that's an enormous, I mean, it's an enormous amount of work, it seems, to kind of keep that together.
Yeah, I think with the approach is farmer is happy, also the cooperative, because they get money more sorted, direct selling to and processing like Valrhona, and also they give more knowledge with the different stakeholder, from different stakeholder, like from the government, from forest government official, from us as an NGO, from the financial institution. Financial institution also give credit or give soft loan to the cooperative, and this is more happy from the farmer and farmer cooperative.
A really wonderful example. I'd love to learn more about that.
Seth, could I jump in really quick? And first, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how for sharing. It's 9:32 now, so in theory it would be time for the break. We're a little bit behind. Do you want to keep going, Seth, or do you want to break for a few minutes and then come back?
Let me get through the land. I think we're almost done here. I wanted to get to the integrated landscape finance thing, and then we can take a break. I mean, this is really great too, because I was telling Patricia and Bailey this yesterday. I don't often talk about this thing in like a 2-hour session. I often have oh, you have 10 minutes to talk about integrated landscape finance. So it's really nice that we can have this open discussion, because I think we're talking about a lot of the content that's coming later on in the presentation. So I don't think it's necessarily that we're behind. I think it's these topics are coming up, organically. All right, so we talked about integrated finance. So this last one, I know you have all had from Patricia and Max and Bailey before, the what is a landscape, but this is just a refresher to finish out the term integrated landscape finance. So what is a landscape? It's about a place. So we talk about integrated finance. You can have an integrated investment plan, but doesn't have to be place-based, right? So when we talk about a landscape, your agenda relates to a geography. A geography that is tied together either ecologically, or it could be a jurisdiction, or it could be cultural, or a combination of these things. Often there's an ecological tie-in when we talk about a landscape. So in this image, there's a river going through, so it could be a watershed, or there might be a biodiversity corridor there. So you're managing biodiversity, or it could be a supply shed, if you will, like a place where it's an important cocoa producing area, for example. And so you're managing all the actors in the cocoa supply chain. they're all part of this, but they're not just thinking just about a supply chain, they're thinking about the geography in which the supply chain is embedded. And within a landscape, there are many interactions, complex interactions that over the space of the landscape, the geography of the landscape, but also over time. So when you think about creating a plan for that place, you need to think about both of these dimensions, not just, okay, what are all the things we want to do right now in this place? We have to think out into the future. You know, one investment, one activity building on another. Also, in this day and age, we need to be thinking about climate change. You know, how's the climate going to change over time, and how will that impact the types of investments we want to make now to adapt to climate change? And dealing with this this diversity and complexity is a challenge. But that's why we're all here. We don't do it because it's difficult, but you know, you do it because if you don't do it, then the program of action won't really work. So that's landscape. Does anyone have anything to say? Maybe we can stop for the coffee, but comment about the concept of landscape. I'm assuming that you all have been in the sessions before where landscape was discussed. Yeah. Okay, well, Patricia, so should we take a little break?
Yeah, we could do stop for a 5-minute break and come back. Does that sound okay? All right, so it's 9:36 for me, so let's come back at whatever hour 41
for
you guys.
Okay.
Stretch your legs, get some coffee, and see you in a bit.
Okay.
Recording. So I think we can get started again. How's everyone doing? Let's do a show of hands to see how lost is everyone from 0 to 10. You get it?
10 is 10 the most? Is 10 the most lost? Or is 10...
Oh, that's a good question. I guess 10 would be, I understand everything that Seth is saying, absolutely, and 0 is, oh, I really don't get this. This is it's a difficult topic to follow. These are difficult concepts. All right, so does anyone have any questions about the previous section? Anything we'd like clarification on? Please feel free to ask any questions. If you have any questions, this is the, you know, how people say that if you have any questions, it's likely that other people have the same questions. This is the perfect example of that kind of situation, because these topics or these concepts are complex that if you have any questions about them, it's likely that other people in the group do too. So please feel free to raise your hand. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat box. But I think we can keep going, Seth. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, let's keep going. Yeah, and please, as Patricia said, I invite you to speak up at any point. You don't even have to wait. I mean, you know, you should raise your hand, but you don't have to wait for a question and answer session. I think because of the nature of this session, which is really about introducing, you know, some ideas and concepts, the whole point is for us to kind of get in the same page and start speaking the same language. So just like raise your hand if I say something that, you know, you have something to add to it because you think it will help others kind of understand it, or if I'm saying something that is not connecting in any way. All right. So this gets us to the what is integrated landscape finance. So we've talked about what finance is, talked about what integrated means, integrated being the integration on the side of the money coming together, and integration on the side of the action agenda coming together. So integrated, and then landscape being that action agenda coming together in a particular geography that has a set of common objectives. So integrated landscape finance. So doing all of those, getting that integrated set of activities together in a particular geography and getting them funded. So integrated landscape finance, a finance approach which supports multi-project, multi-sector investments. We use this word portfolio, but if that doesn't work for you, then you can throw that out. You don't need the word portfolio. These multi-project, multi-sector investments that encourage connections or synergies between those investments that generate impacts at a landscape scale. So that's what we mean by integrated landscape finance. And I should say this now, some of you may be more familiar with this type of approach, but not in a rural context. I mean, I assume that you all work in rural contexts and agricultural contexts, but at least a lot of the people I talk to see this type of activity going on in more of an urban context, actually, and it helps them kind of wrap their heads around this. We have here, particularly, you know, I live in the United States. I see this a lot of, they call like urban redevelopment, where there will be an agenda for like the downtown of a city, which there's a kind of a political will among a number of different stakeholders to make this downtown of the city, to transform it in a positive way. But that requires an integrated set of actions. So it might be an investment in a park, like a downtown park, and an investment in the anchor hospital of the city, an investment in additional housing, particularly affordable housing in the city. Those are examples. And the idea, though, is that doing all of those things together have these synergistic kinds of effects on each other. So if you do them all together, then it creates a downtown for the city, which is has a higher quality of life than it otherwise would have. But if you just made one of those investments, it wouldn't have that emergent effect. It wouldn't have that larger scale effect. So this is essentially what we talk about when we talk about integrated landscape management. It's just that we are talking about more rural contexts, more conservation contexts sometimes. And for a variety of reasons we don't need to get into now, it seems that this type of integrated action tends to happen less in the rural areas than it does in urban areas. So for what I've found is that people can connect to it more if you talk about cities. Okay. So why integrated landscape finance, which has come up already in the session a number of times, that in a particular landscape, there are ecological interactions within, and also economic interactions that have synergistic effects, meaning that doing just one thing in one place is good as it may be. Let's call it one farm. Let's think about sustainability. So you may transition, there may be one farm or a set of farmers or one cooperative, if it's a small cooperative, that's transitioning from some kind of, let's call it coffee for simplicity, some sort of, you know, sun coffee production to something that seemed to be a more sustainable, like shade coffee system, for example, which is a very good in and of itself. But if much of the landscape is dominated by this type of production, unless more of the farmers are transitioning to that type of production system, not just transition coffee, but there are other types of land use activities near a river, for example, riparian areas near a river, that unless there is a wholesale change in land management, then you do not get the overall benefit of doing those things together. such as improved watershed. So that's why essentially it's the same, the answer for why integrated landscape finance is very similar to the answer of why integrated landscape management, really. It's just that when you talk about finance, you may have to make the case in more financial terms for the people who have the money. Like, what's the business case for doing this? No. So the coordinated planning improves, accelerates this transformation. Okay. Now, this is sort of another way to talk about integrated landscape finance. Again, this may not resonate for you, it resonates for some people. Is that what's the difference between integrated landscape finance and other kinds of land management approaches or land-based investment approaches? So we have sectoral approaches that tend to focus on one economic sector, like agriculture, for example, or water. And you can have a lot of collaboration between actors in those sectors. This tends to be more directed by the public sector in a public policy or public planning document. But it also typically does not include issues outside of the sector. It's very focused on one sector. A supply chain approach focuses on a particular value chain and components of the value chain. Use coffee as an example. So it's the production, the growing of the coffee, the processing, the drying of the coffee, the processing of coffee, the marketing of coffee, exports, etc. It could be directed by a coalition of private sector actors involved in the industry. Also, public sector would be involved as well. But in this case, there's often little attention given to the social and environmental impacts in the areas in which that crop is produced, which that commodity is produced. So we call that a supply chain approach. So integrated landscape finance, it differs from these in that the geographic area is a starting point for the planning. And the entry points in terms of like ultimate goals and objectives relate to sort of spatial integration of these sectors and value chains. And it tends, or the goal is for it to bring together public sector and private sector, along with what we call civic sector, which is not that common of a term, but refers to more kind of NGOs. So not just government and private sector, but also community organizations and NGOs. So that's just one set of ideas. Another one, which we introduced earlier in the session, is this idea of enabling investment in asset investment. And I think this one is a really important one, particularly for people who are just starting to develop like an integrated investment plans, because I think it takes it's really kind of to think differently about these different types of investments. So the enabling investments are the ones that are typically not profit generating, but are still very important. And I should say that my experience is that these are the kinds of investments that are typically ignored by investors of all kinds. And when I use the word investors, I'm using that very broadly to mean both, the funders, philanthropists and governments, but also the private sector investors who are looking for a commercial return. So anyone with money, basically, as I'm calling an investor. And particularly the multi-stakeholder platform piece of this, extremely underfunded. Everywhere we look, this is a major problem for integrated landscape management in general. It is very difficult to find funds for the multi-stakeholder platforms themselves, for the convening, for all of the activities that have been covered in the session. I mean, not this session, but this course so far. The vision development, the convening of stakeholders. I think, Raul, you were mentioning stakeholder analysis, action plan development, all of this no one wants to pay for this stuff, typically. So it's something that we've really made an effort to try to highlight the value of this kind of work over time, even in terms of business case, because it's not seen to be, having direct short-term impact, which even in the sort of the grant world or the philanthropic world, this is what people want. You can't say, I'm going to put money into a multi-stakeholder platform, and that's going to produce, X number of people who are lifted out of poverty, or increase production of, agriculture production by 10% over 2 years. It's just not that kind of investment. It's difficult anyway, it's difficult to get money for this. Strategic planning and coordination, assessments, spatial assessments and monitoring, and then capacity development. So these are all things we call enabling investment. So when considering what an integrated landscape investment portfolio would be, or an integrated landscape, a set of ideas, integrated set of activities that you want to have funded, it's very important to not ignore this. This is, I guess, I'm saying all of this to make this point. Please do not ignore this. And you will have to make a case, a strong case for why this is valuable and why this is important. And then you have your asset investments, which are the ones that are you more typically think of when you think of an investment in landscape. So this is agriculture production, aquaculture production, value chain development, processing of your coffee, for example. There could be extractive industry in your landscape, built infrastructure like roads, bridges, water infrastructure, this kind of thing. It could still be a public investment, but it's an asset investment. It's a physical thing that you have in your landscape. And then also we call green infrastructure. So this is not a road. This is more, green infrastructure is a term that is used sometimes to refer to some sort of like ecological restoration that provides like a direct ecosystem service. So improving a riparian area, for example, that also improves water quality or water quantity, that is referred to as green infrastructure. So, but I do want to pause on this idea of enabling investment and asset investment for a moment, and see if those of you on the call have some comments about it. Like for you, what are the enabling investments that you think would be most important for you? Yes, Raul.
Yes, yes. I just have a question. If when we talk about enabling investments, are those more related to the investment that the state or the government does because affects everybody and they have the resources to do it? Or can we see it doesn't? Sorry, I live in a really commercial area, so there is a lot of traffic here today. What can we look at this enable investment as well as the small action that the platform can take and improve some of the conditions in the landscape or the specific area that we have chosen?
That's a good question. I guess I think of it more as action that the platform takes, but this could be funded by government, if you will. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because if I'm thinking about like enable investment, like for example, transportation, roads, electricity, things like that, power, that will be millions and millions of lempiras or dollars that we need to invest to improve and have the right conditions to move merchandise or product from the farmer to the cities, for example.
Right.
we couldn't do that as a consortium, as a platform. Will have to be the government. But then as a consortium, we could do some small action within a specific area. So that's what I was thinking, that the enable, when I think enable environment in general, or enable enabling this improving, I think more like local action by local governments or the state or federal government. When you have to put a lot of resources, financial resources on that. Maybe if we talk about the consortium, there are more specific and limited actions that we could do.
Well, that's interesting. It depends on the scope of your consortium too. I mean, it's going to be different for all of you. Like it could be that, and it's true, of course, like your consortium won't be spending money on public infrastructure like roads. But it could be that your consortium I'm just coming up with this example off the top of my head. Like there's a road that is slated to go through a very like ecologically sensitive area of a forest, for example. And it's important for your consortium to change the routing of the road. So it would be an action of your consortium maybe to do advocacy to the government for how they spend the infrastructure money. I guess maybe that would be the relationship. I don't know.
Yes, I just was thinking that when I think about enable environment in general, I think more like macro actions that still we as a stakeholder part of the specific landscape, we get some benefits. As well as a consortium, as a platform, we still can do some actions that benefit other people within the small area. So I just was wondering if
Well, I mean, some of this is I'm introducing these terms, but it's a little bit honestly, it's like a little bit semantic too. I don't want to get too bogged down in whether a specific thing, I mean, is at it could be a gray area. Like I think of asset investment like the road building. Road building actually is like an asset investment because it is a specific thing that the public sector has spent money on that you can touch and you can feel that exists in the world. And the enabling investment is more like, from the government perspective, is more like setting a policy, like a trade policy or something. That's kind of a distinction, you know, I would make. The enabling ones are kind of the ones you can't touch. The asset ones are the ones you can touch, even if it's a public sector investment. That's how I make that distinction. But actually, can I ask you then a question too, because I think this is really key. We talk about strategy, landscape finance strategy, in portfolios of actions, but I think you could be in a situation where the most important action in your landscape, or that your consortium could take, has to do with the interaction with government. I mean, this is what I was saying before, almost like an advocacy thing. Like if there's a government policy which is so limiting what you want to do, like that engagement with government can be the top of your action agenda. I mean, how do you all, because your consortium you mentioned, you talk about government as being something separate. I mean, I think there are some partnerships that government is part of the partnership. How do you all interact with government or express your, you know, what your agenda is and try to influence government? Or how does that work?
Oh, of course, the government, local and state government or federal government, they have local agencies and they have to be part of the platform. It's just like they will contribute, and sometimes they are the one who regulates and kind of lead the way, but they are part of the whole thing. You cannot leave out the government in this type of action that will you take in a specific landscape. because sometimes because of regulation or different policies, they are the one who kind of help to glue together between the private sector and the public sector and the NGOs and CSOs.
Yeah. Right.
It's just a bunch of stakeholders, including the government.
So I'm gonna ask does anyone else have anything to share about the priority of enabling investments or asset investments? So what's on the top of mind for you all?
Seth, I don't know if you saw the comment from Lillian in the chat box. She said, I'd like to understand more about integrated landscape finance, some more examples. So I think that maybe if you jump into the case study, it might help.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Let's do that. Yeah, that's true. That might stimulate some ideas. All right, well, Patricia, can I stop sharing my screen? And do you think could you start sharing
Yes.
because I actually have some notes for this that I wanted to bring up.
Sure, absolutely. Let me. Am I on the right slide?
Yeah.
Just tell me when to skip ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it's just 2 slides. So, all right. So here's a case study, and hopefully, in a year or so, we'll come back to you, and you'll have your own case studies, and we'll start using yours as case studies of beautiful examples of integrated landscape finance. This is one that has been part of the Landscape Finance Accelerator of 1,000 Landscapes. So we have a program of work which directly provides support to landscape partnerships that are trying to develop landscape finance strategies. And we started working 4 landscapes around the world, and now we have another 4 and some others that are coming online soon. This work was supported by a group called the Regenerative Development Group, and the Mount Mulanje Conservation Trust is the name of the landscape partnership that we worked with here. So this is in Malawi. And this is a really interesting case. So Mount Mulanje is the highest mountain in tropical southern Africa. At the core of it is a forest reserve that's a protected area and a UNESCO biosphere reserve. It has biodiversity hotspots with 500 unique plant and animal species. It was also surrounded by the first tea estates in Africa and in a fairly large smallholder farming community. So in this photo, you can see this, and you got tea, plus you have dense forest in the mountain. So the Mount Mulanje Conservation Trust historically supported the activities within a protected area. So you can see from that photo where the protected area would be. But they're now taking on a more active management concession from the government. So this basically means that the forestry department in Malawi wanted the Mount Mulanje Conservation Trust to take on a larger role in this place, not just within the protected area, but outside of the protected area, to manage the pressure, mainly the agricultural pressure that was coming into the protected area. So they wanted the support of this conservation trust, which is fairly strong. And so this MMCT, Mount Mulanje Conservation Trust, adopted a new strategic plan, recognizes that their activities need to focus more on the full landscape as opposed to just the protected area, and that plan needs to be more holistic and recognize the relationship between sectors and actors. In other words, they recognized they needed to be doing integrated landscape management in this place, as opposed to just focusing on the conservation. So they developed this multi-sectoral integrated management plan. It's a 10-year plan which serves essentially as a strategy and action plan in the ILM parlance. And this group now has a broad and diverse leadership. So the board of this MMCT, it has a representation of traditional authorities, 6 sector and local government agencies. There are research institutions, part of this, conservation organizations. There's a private sector association, and also civil society organizations. So you can go, Patricia, to the next slide. So what does this mean in terms of integrated landscape finance? So they had this integrated management plan, which they wanted to translate into a financial plan to figure out what in this landscape are we doing now that we need to get additional funds for, that we can scale up, and then also what in this landscape would need to happen in order for us to meet our goals. So we call that, the startup. So for what was already going on, we call it the scale up. We've got, there's direct investments for forest restoration. So this would include like forest restoration grants, forest carbon investments they're exploring, additional carbon investments in cook stoves, efficient cook stoves they're getting carbon finance for that. They needed finance, like I'll call this blended finance, this mix of for-profit and nonprofit for small scale irrigation system for smallholder farmers, and loans for some emerging small enterprise in the landscape to support bee keeping, bee products, and also some aquaponics, and then also so other processing facilities for agroforestry. So these are all things that are currently ongoing, but they are trying to access additional funding for. And then new ideas, we call these the startups. They need money for grants, for training input for horticulture and seedling nurseries, market development for artisanal crafts makers, to link them to retail markets, to larger markets. They want funds to lease 6,000 hectares of land for more sustainable timber production and fruit tree plantations, so they can get some economic benefit, additional economic benefit out of the forest area while not, degrading the forest area. Ecotourism has a lot of potential for this area. There already is some ecotourism, but additional infrastructure, social enterprises for ecotourism, I think has a lot of potential, and they're looking for money for that. Looking for a water utility upgrade. So you can see from this, again, this is just an example. It's a diverse set of activities. It's across different sectors. And each of these investments needs different kinds of money. So it wouldn't, we talked before about a grant facility, for example. Like a grant facility for a landscape like this would be very interesting, but it wouldn't meet all of their financial needs. Like it would be a good thing to have there, but they're also looking to they're looking for debt investment and equity investment, so an idea came up for this group that there's been now research done on, which is to create a landscape bond. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the bonds. Bonds are basically they're debt mechanisms, meaning it is a way for an entity, like a relatively large entity, to borrow money from a lot of smaller entities. So like a government, like a city government can issue a bond, or for in the US, you have like a local school system or something like this. And anyone can sort of buy a piece of the bond, meaning that eventually the person who buys the piece of the bond will get repaid over time. But in the meantime, you've basically lent money to this large central entity to have money to do a set of activities. So in the case of Mount Wallangi, that's what would happen. There would be an entity that would issue this bond, meaning that they would receive money from, it could be a lot of different kinds of people who would buy pieces of this bond, and they would use that money for this action plan for some of these scale up activities and some of these startup activities. And again, it's not going to be for everything, because there might, some of these are some of these are for-profit investments, some of these are not-for-profit investments. Actually, mainly these are asset investments, but you would also have, enabling investments in here too, because the Mount Wallangi Conservation Trust itself needs support, to tie all of this together. So anyway, there's research going on about developing a green bond mechanism for this. And this is where we are right now with this. We're trying, there's been a lot of work to define the what needs money, and then the next step after that is, okay, well, how do we find the right kinds of money for this? I think where we are in this process, at least what I'm talking about today, is like, let's figure out at least what we need money for, because that's half the battle, if not more than half the battle. It takes a lot of work just to even figure that out. And then the more precision you have on what you need money for, the easier it is to identify the folks who can give you that money in the right ways and right mechanisms. So let me stop here for a second to see if there are questions about this case study. Okay.
Seth, I just want to point out that we only have 14 minutes left,
Okay.
just so that you're.
All right. So we can keep going through. I can also take back the control of the slides. Okay, so
Seth,
yes.
do you, maybe what I trying to explain earlier is because we are still trying to set up all the stakeholders and have this platform together, and maybe we're thinking more, or I was thinking more in a short-term vision on how to do some small actions together,
Mhm.
a platform. And I looking at this, what you have on the screen, I looking at that like, once you are consolidated as a group, you could go and take a step up and go further. It's just like a process. And maybe since we are in the initial states, I mean, it doesn't matter how time you have been in the landscape area. Sometimes it takes longer or shorter, depending on how the things go. But maybe what I was thinking was, looking at all this, is like, once you are consolidated, you can apply for money, grants, whatever different ways you can get money from, and start doing more things more on a bigger scale in that landscape. So I'm not sure if that might be a way to look at it. Not sure.
I'm not. You're saying that when if you're more actually, can you say it one more time? I just want to make sure I'm getting the point.
Well, I was thinking that maybe when I was talking early in the morning, in the beginning of the session, about the actions that we take as a platform, maybe I was looking at them in a short vision kind of way, because we're still consolidated as a group. And once you have set up the basis for this consortium that include all kind of stakeholders, non-profit, CSO, government, private, in the landscape. Once you are consolidated, you start looking at more financially things to do like you talking about here about carbon prints and all other kind of interventions that you could do and apply to money or finance from other agencies or government as a group.
Yeah.
And maybe the action that I was looking at early in the morning were like more small actions financed by the same group in a smaller scale.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and as you say, this is actually a good bridge into this idea of a framework, landscape finance framework, which is that I want to make this point that I've been describing this as I think it's probably come out a bit of it as sequential. And actually, so the slide here makes it seem a bit sequential. As the sort of the ILM integrated landscape management process does as well. Like, okay, you would have to consolidate your consortium and your stakeholder group and create trust within it and create an action plan, and then only then would you get those activities financed, which is it's a simple way of describing a process, and that's the way I told the story about this landscape in Malawi. But I think the more realistic, I think real world way of describing it is that there's not a starting point and an ending point of accessing funding for the activities in your landscape. And not only that, is that I've been involved in examples where an effort to access to get funding for a large scale or seen to be like exciting activity, like let's say a big carbon project, like a forest carbon project or something like this, actually becomes an incentive for stakeholders in the landscape to come together around a broader vision for that landscape, because people get excited once you start talking about money. So I don't want to communicate that you have to do all of the work around partnership development before you can talk about money. There are even we talked about development of financial mechanisms and grant facility and all that kind of stuff. Like, you could start talking about finding ways to bring money into a landscape through a set of grants or a set of projects, first. And then over time, develop like a broader landscape action plan as people recognize that the overall, like the ultimate objectives of the landscape can't be met with just like that one single project you have. I wish I had actually I had another case study here to describe that. I don't know if that was totally clear what I just said. Does that make sense, Raul?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So I'll go through this briefly. And again, the titles here are not what's important. I just want to communicate sort of steps of this process. So if you were interested in, doing integrated landscape finance, or basically having a dedicated effort to get funding for a integrated set of activities, these are the elements here on this slide that are involved in that. And again, this does not have to be sequential, okay? But just for the purposes of describing, this is our 1 through 5. So the developing of a vision and strategy in the landscape, this is what you do in integrated landscape management anyway, okay? And I have a couple of slides after this that show where this fits into the integrated landscape management cycle, because I know that you've all been introduced to the integrated landscape management cycle. So vision, strategy, action plan, and then identification of needs, right? So like this here, identification of needs, they've done this here, because you can't get money for something if you don't know what you're trying to get money for. And then that's when you go to identifying potential sources of money and types of financial mechanisms. And this is where it gets pretty technical in this area, like number 4, where you may need, consultants or outside help or something like that. At least that's been my observation. And then finally getting the money. So where this lives, and I'm gonna go fast now because I know we're running out of time. To contextualize where this lives within integrated landscape management, the way we talk about it, it tends to live within this number 3, number 4, vision and planning and taking action. So a finance strategy is very related to like an action plan. So here, sorry, we have, like, I think of as a finance strategy as a kind of articulation of an action plan that includes a strategy for how to fund it, basically. So it lives in a 3, and then once you've identified what you want to do, undertaking action, we describe as the landscape investment portfolio. So these are the sets, articulated sets of financial, of needs, of financial needs, and then getting them funded, is the integrated investment portfolio. Again, this is just using different words to describe things that I've said before, but this is how it lives within the ILM framework. All right, so let's see where we are. We have 5 minutes left. Let me see, we could talk about these experiences. So we can talk in the next session about your experiences with these landscape finance strategies. So, as part of homework, you can think of something you might want to share if you've, to the extent you've been involved in these types of processes. I want to say a little bit about the challenges, and I won't have this as discussion for lack of time. But just so there are many challenges to this. I've described some of them so far. A key one that we see is the identification of the different flavors of finance, for the different investments. So again, precision, the more precision, the better in identifying what you need money for, because that will help dictate the kind of money you look for. And as I said before, people do often get in these traps of looking for the wrong type of money for a certain project. So it's like something that could be, is really like a private sector investment, but they try to get it from the government, or they try to ask the private sector to do something that should be like a government, role, for example. So that's really important. Understanding time scale. So some investments like your landscape partnership, for example, like you need long-term money ideally to support your landscape partnership, because it's not something you just do over the course of a year. It's not a project that ends over 1 year. It's like you'll be around for 20 years. So you want that, you're looking for that kind of money for long-term investment. For agricultural investment, like a kind of short-term, yearly cycle agriculture investments, those are a lot shorter. Infrastructure investments are longer, so time scale is important. Data, access to data. In order for anyone to want to invest in a project, the more data, the better. They'll want to see. Anyway, there's a lot to be said here, and I think this will be covered in other topics. So there are ways of monitoring landscape scale progress over time, and as far as individual projects, financial investors are looking for data because they're always trying to manage their risk. They're financial risk. They want to make sure they get their money back, or they're trying to make sure they're getting the social and the environmental benefit that they're paying for. And as far as these emerging solutions, we can move this to the session, the next session, which is really more about solutions that are emerging on innovative new types of financial mechanisms. I was talking about, grant facilities and landscape bonds and landscape funds and that kind of stuff, which are really interesting. At least they're interesting to me. And then different types of support services that are being developed to help landscape partnerships develop finance strategies and get them funded. I mentioned the Landscape Finance Accelerator of 1,000 Landscapes. And the goal of this is to develop a toolkit, an experience for other types of service providers to work with landscape partnerships to do this. This is a major problem we see, which is that there aren't enough people with expertise to support landscape partnerships to develop landscape finance strategies. So, Patricia, we're about at a time here.
Yeah. Seth, so
Yeah.
actually you can take that. I updated the journal reflection so that
Okay.
it ties a little bit closer. So you can stop sharing your screen if you like.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for a great session. Thank you so much, Seth, for guiding us through this very dense, complex module session. I just posted in the chat box a journal reflection for Thursday. Really what we're asking you to do is just think about what everything that we talked about in this session, what was the muddiest point? What was a specific concept or idea that didn't really seem, it was unclear to you that we could explore further on Thursday. So just think about that, write it in your journals, and then we'll ask you to share back on Thursday. So as Seth was saying, this session was really about, framing an introduction, an overview of integrated landscape finance. And then on Thursday, we're going to start looking at some tools and some strategies and some resources to really dive in a little bit further. So I'm going to wrap it up because it's 10:30. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you all on Thursday, and I'll follow up later today with a recording and the slides.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Seth.
Okay.
Thank you, Seth.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.